Hello, friends. In this video, we're going to be talking about the important steps of writing and the important components that we don't want to miss out on when we teach our children writing. So with writing, there are lots of different ways that we can write. There's lots of different genres, but where do we start? When we start with writing, we're going to be starting with our lines. And you've seen those papers that have the slanted lines and then the curved lines. It's about following lines. And so that practice is really important for our children to start out with when they start writing. A lot of times when children start writing, I've been told through my training as a teacher that the kids will start circling, right? And they'll draw circles first. But I've seen as a preschool teacher that some draw lines first and then do circles. So I'm not really sure what their research stand is on that, other than the fact that they just like to draw the circles or the lines, whatever it may be. What we want to start having them do after they start figuring out how to color on paper with those circles or lines, we want them to start tracing and making their lines more specific and more directed. So shapes and lines, after lines, we go to shapes, and then we go to our symbols and our letters, and we teach them how to draw those symbols and letters. And then we go into the alphabet, right? So a couple of things that I want to touch on with you about the symbols and about our alphabet letters is that there's a couple of different ways to do this. There are kids, when kids are little, every child has a tendency of dyslexia, every child. And that's why when they're younger, we see a lot of letters and a lot of things that are reversed because they're working through that dyslexia stage. Some kids tend to hold on to that and some kids will let that go. So that's where dyslexia kind of forms. It's like a natural ability in all of us, but we kind of make a choice when we're younger, whether or not we choose to be dyslexic, which is an interesting concept. So when we're looking at alphabet letters, there are a few different things that people have mentioned throughout time that have worked to help eliminate those dyslexic tendencies. One of those things comes from Marie Montessori. Marie Montessori would tell us that when children start to write, that they need to write with cursive writing. The reason for her saying this is that the cursive writing would eliminate any natural reversals like your B's and D's and P's and Q's, because when we write in cursive, it's all connected and it flows from left to right, which is really powerful in a lot of ways because we have a tendency, the natural way, I should say the natural way, not just a tendency, the way we think is from the bottom to the top and right to left. And so when you think about our language, it's completely opposite, right? We're teaching our kids left to right, top to bottom, which can be a little bit confusing and a little bit of an adjustment for their brains when we start doing our writing and our reading, actually. So as we're writing, the reason why Marie Montessori thought cursive was a good idea is because it works from left to right. I know this video is opposite, so I should do it this way. So you see the left to right. We work left to right, and that's the way the cursive would flow the letters from left to right, and then top to bottom, of course. So that is an interesting concept, and I've heard that it works really, really well for a lot of people. The other thing that I would like to add, I didn't start writing or having my kids write in cursive, though I think learning cursive is incredibly valuable, but that is a step that you could take for your kids to help them get that motion down, left to right and top to bottom. Another thing that I feel for me that has been really helpful is to just use uppercase letters. I know. I said it. I said it. And how many kindergarten teachers are like, don't use uppercase letters. Okay. And this is my thinking. Honestly, if you use uppercase letters, your B's and P's and D's aren't going to be as difficult to remember for your children. So I like using uppercase letters. I do like the concept of Marie Montessori. However, the difference is with how I do reading and how I introduce reading and writing to my children, the cursive letters where they're all combined together and where they all flow together makes it really difficult to separate them into separate letters. I just have a hard time processing that as separate letters when I look at cursive. And so maybe my kids wouldn't, but I did. So I'm like, nah, I don't want to do the cursive because it just flows. And I have a hard time when I'm working with the sounds of each individual letter. I want it to be boom, boom, boom. And that might just be my personality. So if you're like me and you're like a little bit more rigid and not as flowy, then maybe working with the uppercase letters of the alphabet might be a good idea for you to introduce to your children first. However, if you like the idea of cursive, there's a lot of research with Marie Montessori that says that that's a good practice and that the kids will learn how to read the cursive and they'll be able to, there was some controversy at one time whether or not they would be able to read print, but I don't think that ever went through. And I'm pretty sure that everyone who's done a Montessori school who has taught those little kids cursive first, all of those kids can read print just fine. So that's just a little bit out there for you, something to think about as you're introducing letters to your children and how you want to introduce them to your children. If you want to work through the B's and D's and P's and Q's, that one can be really quite challenging. So if you want to go more traditional and you want to say, well, I'm going to teach them the lowercase letters because that's what they need to learn. So they're not writing in all caps because for whatever reason that drives people crazy when they see capital letters in words. However, we have adults that still do that. And there are adults that write beautiful, beautiful letters in all caps. And I just think it's beautiful print. So if you're more traditional, then my suggestion would be to take a graph, a colored graph, and you're going to split, or a paper, you're going to split it into 4 pieces. So 4 quadrants, and each quadrant, just color a different color. So have a red quadrant, a blue quadrant, green and yellow. It doesn't really matter which quadrant is what color. And then go ahead and write the lowercase letters within those quadrants and let the kids see where those quadrants are. And that having the color and seeing the quadrant lines will really help them understand which direction your B's, P's, Q's go. So it will look like this. I could use the share screen, but I'm just going to do this because I have a paper here with me. This is what it looks like because I want you to see how to write this. So here's your graph, your 4 quadrants, and your lines are going to line up with the graph or how the graph is. So it's not necessarily going to be in alphabetical order. And I'm just going to do this. The only trick is Q's. How we print our Q's is crazy because they look like backward P's. And so I always like to just add a little tail to help my kids because it can be very confusing, but this is what it looks like. Okay. So your line here is going to line up with the actual quadrant. So this is going to be, I know this is backwards probably from the video. So this is a B, this is a D, a Q, and a P. And for a time, I would just write the capital letters there. And then you just have your kids point to them, which quadrant they're in, and name what quadrant they're in. So you would say B, D, Q, P, and you would just practice going back and forth randomly, having them call out the name of the letter in the quadrants, and the color will kind of help them recognize which side of the quadrant they're on. So that might be something that can be very helpful and beneficial to you. If you're looking to do more of the traditional, no, I want to teach my kids lowercase letters first, and then I'll teach them only to uppercase those things that are important or that begin at the beginning of the sentence. However you want to do that, that's fine. But there's some ideas for you if you're having a hard time getting kids to write the letters correctly in the right directions. Okay, so when we do our handwriting, there are lots of different ways to implement handwriting, but there are really good ways as well. So I'm going to share a couple of really good ideas that are going to help benefit your children when they do their handwriting. The first one is tracing. Now, I'm going to share 3 of them with you, and all 3 can be activated at the same time, and I'll explain how. But tracing, copying, and then practicing. So when we're talking about tracing, we are looking at something like this. Now, she finished her book already, but here's tracing. Okay, she wanted to do cursive. So this was all in like a light color, and she traced it with a marker. That's tracing, where the words are spelled out for them already, and then they just traced it with a marker. Then we have copying, and that's where you have something written above, and then they copy the words down below the exact same way. I don't know where my copy of that went, but it's not here. But they'll have an example or a sentence, and then they'll just copy that sentence underneath. And then we have practicing. The practicing is really important as well because we want to be able to see how they're understanding their words and their sounds and how they work together. So we don't correct their practices as far as spelling goes because that is our assessment. So I use that as an assessment saying, oh, they need to work on this word we're going to practice this word because I've seen it misspelled several times, but what sounds are they missing within the words? And then we can work with it. So your practice writing is really, really going to be invaluable for you to help your children become better spellers and better writers. Okay, so this is what it looks like. I'm trying to, the opposition, it's crazy. Okay, so right about a time, okay, so when I feel sad, I can feel happy again. Okay, the biggest thing that I was looking for in this is when they do their practice writing, it is helpful for you to mention the things that they did correctly and not the things that they did wrong. This can be helpful and encouraging to them to continue writing. So if when I have a conversation with my little girl who wrote this, I say, I see that you got your end mark. You put your end mark in there. That is your exclamation mark. I love that you remember to put your end mark or your exclamation mark at the end of this sentence. Or I'll say, oh, you made a capital W at the beginning of the sentence. I don't know if this one would be considered a capital, but do you see what I'm saying? You find things within the sentence that are done correctly and reiterate that to them, and they'll remember to continue to do it. And we don't even have to say, oh, you forgot your end mark. Oh, you forgot this. You forgot that. And then they don't get discouraged from the writing, but they get more excited to continue writing. So another example would be, I is capitalized. Yes. Every time we talk about ourselves or we say I, we need to capitalize it. And look, you did it both times. Now, does that matter that other letters in the sentence have been capitalized throughout the sentence? No, but she does know now that every time she writes the letter I, it's going to be capitalized. You see what I'm saying? We can make things easier than they need to be. And we don't have to have big, long lectures about it. We just point it out and they get it. And then they're done. We don't have to teach it. They teach themselves those things. So that's one good thing about the practicing writing. The other thing I mentioned earlier was just the spelling, and then how the words are constructed will help us understand more of what they're writing. Your practicing format is going to be your assessment for your writing for your kids. Okay, so we have tracing and copying and practicing. And then we have, after the practicing, we can do an editing. Okay, part of that also is going to be important where we do want to edit some things and we do want to help them with their spelling. This comes at a little bit older age, like in late elementary into middle school, when they really start gaining confidence with their writing and they really start understanding like capitals and periods and the easy things with the writing and how things are put together. Then we can start talking about editing the words and looking more at the spelling and the paragraphs and how to do the sentences more properly. With the editing, I have a writer's workshop, which is awesome because when we get into the editing format, what we want to do is that creative expansion. And the creative expansion in writing comes through all the different genre types. So we can look at our storytelling, we can look at our poetry, and then we can look at even expanding out informational text like our essays and our research and things like that. So that's all under the umbrella of editing our writing, is using that creative expansion as our kids get older. So those are the levels of writing. I know there was something else I wanted to share about, oh yes, so the patterning. I told you that tracing, copying, practicing, and editing can all take place at the same time. The way you can do this is one day I have, as far as my scheduling goes, I will have my kids work on their tracing one day for writing, and then they're copying another day for writing, and then I'll have a practice writing or a journaling is what I call it, and then I'll do a writer's workshop with them. I usually have either 2 days of writer's workshop, depending on how old they are, or 2 days of tracing, depending on how old they are. But every single day, they're working on one of these components of writing, and it's going to expand their writing and expand their spelling and expand their creativity as well as we work through the editing process and all of that. So each book has a purpose and a place and a time for everything. The creative handwriting is the part that my kids know that I will edit. The practicing is where they can express themselves without really worrying too much about editing. And the third one, the copying and tracing, are just practice pages, fun for them. So those are some ideas with writing as you get, like I said, into those older kids and where they're writing already, then go to creative writing and go to writers' workshops that will expand them in those genres. That's how we can figure out writing and how we can help our children become better writers. And I hope you've enjoyed that. I hope that's been helpful to you. A carpe diem and enjoy writing with your kids. See ya.